Hello, good morning. I just realized that I'm 1 minute early, so I will stall for a little bit. There we go. Okay, right on time. Cheers. Oh, I got my coffee. Also, this is coffee that I bought that I do not like, so if I make faces during the stream, that's why. But I'm still gonna drink it. I don't waste stuff. Good morning, Dana. Welcome, welcome. Adjusting my chair has made the chroma keying slightly weird. Alexi says it's 11 p.m. Well, good evening then. Welcome to our usual coffee chat stream. Happy to have you here. And we've got a lot to talk about today. So as always, we're doing it into sections. And if you're watching on the replay, I've been being pretty good about it because somebody requested it on adding titles so you can sort of skim through the sections and focus on what interests you. So we're going to start with research and then talk about practical stuff. Just like stuff you might need to know or use. We got some job postings and stuff for machine learning technologists, machine learning language technologists, whether or not you use machine learning, and then politics. So like legal stuff. We have a lot of court cases this week to talk about that are relevant to people working in language technology. And then ethics. And I would say both politics and ethics are a little bit surveillance focused right now. It's it just happened to emerge as a theme. And then finally, we end with some miscellaneous fun stuff because we talk about, some heavy stuff on the stream, and I think it's helpful to not go out on that note and give you a little bit of a transition into the rest of your day. All right, with that in mind, let's hop into research. Mistakes were made. Anyway, so starting off with, I believe this is a preprint and has not been published yet, perhaps. But I was particularly interested in this one because can't see my monitors. I was particularly interested in this one because they're using. I don't remember when the last time we talked about vowel spaces was. It was relatively recently. And a vowel space is a representation in the 2 dimensions of the first and second format of the, it's usually presented in such a way that it more or less mirrors, nope, it's usually this way, the palate, right? So a high front vowel is produced with the tongue root forward and up, so E is a high front vowel, and a low back vowel is produced with the tongue root retracted and lowered, so A is a low back vowel. And it's just sort of a representation, a visual representation of those articulatory constraints. Vowels vary on other factors as well, such as roundness, length, vocal quality, depends on the language you're speaking. In English, we have a tense-lax distinction for historical reasons that most languages don't have. But something that I thought was really interesting is that they are using this as a way to do speech synthesis using a small data set. And in particular, they're working with New Zealand English, which is not a variety I speak, but one of the varieties that I worked with in my dissertation work. So it's a language variety I'm pretty familiar with. And something that's interesting about New Zealand English is that there is a vowel shift in the vowel space that is the opposite to most of the other shifts going on in English. So very canonically, like fish is said fish. Yeah, so here's the sort of this example, this KIT word class. And they're using actually format trajectory plots, it looks like, so dynamic change over the course of the vowel articulation. This is very wonky. If you don't know anything about phonetics, you're probably like, okay. But basically, the interesting thing is that they're using this linguistic representation to improve the speech synthesis of this particular, thing, and I thought that was pretty cool. And you can sort of see as you're changing them over time, as the model is changed over time, because they're doing adaptation of the model, if you are familiar with vowel movement in New Zealand English, you're like, yes, there they are, cool. So yeah, just a really cool paper. And like I said, I don't think it has been published yet, but it is on GitHub if you want to check it out. Hello, Luke. And again, this is Visualizing Model Training via Vowel Space for Text-to-Speech Systems by Binu Abishinga. Again, apologies if I ever mispronounce anybody's name. If you know the correct pronunciation, feel free to put it in the chat. And I will correct myself. Hello, Nick. Hello. Opsuna, welcome to the chat. And Hector, good to see y'all. Binu Abishinga, again, apologies if I ever mispronounce anything. Jacine, Jessin, James, Catherine Watson, and Felix Marat Kalam. I'm guessing this is some of these names are from Indian languages that I'm not familiar with, from the University of Auckland, which is in New Zealand. So really cool paper. I thought it was a great synthesis of, of speech technology and linguistic modeling in a way that helped these researchers to do more with less data because of the abstract representations from the linguistic side of things. So cool paper. I really like it. All right, and the next up is actually going to be a call for papers. So this is a workshop that's going to be at NeurIPS, which some of you may know. It's a very large conference if you work in deep learning. And it's going to be in New Orleans in December, which I'm trying to remember when hurricane season ends, and it definitely starts in August, and I don't know when it ends, so I guess I hope that everyone's safe, and I wish only the best for the people of New Orleans. Anyway, so if you are interested in, algorithmic efficiency for neural networks, this workshop sounds like it's going to be really, really good. And, specifically the question is, how can we train them faster by using efficient algorithms rather than just throwing more compute at it, which I am a huge fan of as a general research direction. I think it's going to be very impactful. And Dino says it ends November 30th. This is December 2nd. All right. Oh, I'm assuming that's when hurricane season ends. So yes, best wishes for everyone. This is also, just as an aside, it's been a very mild hurricane season this year. I don't think we've had a single named storm yet, which is very atypical. I think it hasn't happened since the 90s. So I'm personally waiting for the other shoe to drop, but hopefully everything goes well. Yeah, so if you have work on this topic, maybe submit it. Otherwise, if like me, you don't, I'm just gonna keep an eye on it. I think it sounds like a great idea, and cheers to the NeurIPS organizers for accepting the workshop. And I'm gonna fix my webcam because when I was fixing it this morning, apparently something has changed in the lighting that is making the chroma keying not work great, and it's driving me up the wall. Do I tune this every time? Yes. Because the ambient light in this room is wonderful. I love having windows, but the unfortunate side effect is that I have to manually readjust this every time. There we go. Because I do it live. Obviously I'm doing the chroma keying live. Anyway, moving on. Speaking of climate, so I don't know how many of y'all follow me on Twitter, but I recently, I recently tweeted about a decision that I made a while ago but haven't really talked about publicly, and that is that I'm not flying for professional reasons anymore. Pretty much at all, just because I can't justify it, given sort of the state of the climate and how much air travel contributes to it, and also how unnecessary it is. Like, obviously I'm talking to all y'all right now, I can see you in the chat, and Like we don't we don't need to fly to places to have professional collaborations, and I think it's a waste of resources, and I can't justify it. Even though I do really love meeting with people at conferences, it's something that I very much enjoy, and I've had to turn down really cool invitations because of this decision, but I think it's the right decision. And in the sort of discussion around that, somebody, whoever's running this, following this account, brought it to my attention, and it is a petition calling on universities and professional associations to greatly reduce flying. So yeah, I'm not alone, and that's always a nice feeling. Alexi says, if a problem is solved by throwing more compute at it, then it's not a problem. I think that there is kind of a pathological reliance on that in the field. Climate, right? Like compute is not endless, it is not costless, it is just cheap for us right now. And B, you know, using more compute works if you have sufficient data, but for a lot of problems we just don't have sufficient data. And if any of you have bought the book I wrote, something I said in that, which is true, is that a lot of the sort of excitement about deep learning assumes a situation where you have a lot of compute and you have a lot of data. But in my experience, many times when people are working in a corporate setting, they could budget for compute, they just don't have a lot of data. And also very low tolerance for weird errors, particularly when you're serving things to clients. So clients, the people, not clients as a software architecture thing. So yeah, I would say it's still very much a problem. Yeah. Yeah, and Nick says compute is a big carbon problem. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll actually talk about it a little later on today. It's also a water problem. So compute, like data centers require water cooling, and a lot of them are built where there's a lot of sunshine and it is humid, not humid, so that evaporative cooling works, which means they're in places where, you know, like California or Arizona, right? They are very water intensive applications in deserts where there is already a historic drought going on right now. So they are very much not free in terms of the resources they consume. Yep. Nick says, I made the same petition to my boss for an almost full remote position, still waiting for an answer. Fingers crossed for you, Nick. Yeah, I hope that comes through for you. Anyway, so flying less. Speaking of conferences, like I mentioned, I really like conferences, and I was not at this one, but this is Deep Indaba, which is this is an organization that, yeah, you can't see that, founded to basically improve the state of machine learning professionals and availability thereof in Africa. And Sarah Hooker, who is the head of 4IML, which is run by Cohere, which is an NLP startup, is actually African. She's from South Africa and has been really involved in this. And I really liked this point she made in this talk that, I mean, I think it's a point that's been made a lot, but I really like this visualization. It's like, oh, look, a power law, that there's this really strong pressure towards just making bigger models, and that's not great overall. And just some more nice pictures of Sarah giving a talk, right? So it's not great for the environment, it's not great for accessibility of models, it's not great for inference time, right? It's not, you know, there's just sort of this sort of assumption in the field that we can keep going up forever and it'll be fine, and I don't think that's true. I mean, it's sort of like the Industrial Revolution, right? Oh yeah, we can just keep burning coal forever and it'll be fine, or at least for as long as we're alive. But yeah, I don't think that obtains. Nick says data centers are like 5 to 10% of the global electricity consumption. Yeah, it's not insignificant. And I'm not saying that data centers are a poor use of energy, particularly if you do genuinely have a trade-off where, for example, you are doing a job fully remotely and you're not having to fly for it, and that, you know, is obviously more data intensive and more like, you know, internet resource intensive. But if the overall trade-off is that we have, you know, less carbon emissions, then I think that's great. But the sort of premise that people kept trying to push when they were training these big models is we'll only have to train it once and then everybody can use it and pay us to use it, sort of the, you know, the unsaid thing there. And that's not the case. Everyone's training their own. Everyone wants to have the biggest one. It's a kind of gross and unhelpful is how I would put that. Hey, Bobby. Nick says, we just need a more efficient way to train with more parameters. Get to work. Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, a big thing for the workshop that I mentioned at NeurIPS is like, yeah, it would be great if we had more efficiency. And also, I think there's a lot of interest in training smaller models that are as effective. So I have seen less about it recently, but models like Distilbert took a really large language model and reduced its size. And you can get a basically equivalent output for a specific task on a smaller version of a larger model. The question is, can we just train the smaller version the first time? And I think that is still very much unsolved. But also, I think it's an interesting technical problem, right? And also like a pressing one in terms of our use of resources. So, Moore's law is not applicable to language models. No. All right. And then speaking of African machine learning and machine learning researchers, I also recently learned about Ken corpus, and I'll pop this in the chat if y'all want to check it out. I'm not sure how many of you are working in Africa, but perhaps you have colleagues who are, if you are not. And they are building corpora of a lot of languages, mainly focusing on the ones spoken in Kenya, is my understanding. And they are all CC BY, so that's a very permissive license if you're interested in using these. And then there are a lot of corpora that are available, right? So you have question answer pairs, you have Kiswahili transcriptions, you've got a lot of different languages for translation. So really, really rich resource by these practitioners. And if you are interested in joining, it sounds like they host events, and you know they've got professional directory, and also if you're looking for researchers to collaborate or maybe hire, they also have a directory available. So it sounds like a great resource, and check it out if it's relevant to your work. And then finally, I thought this was just nice. If you don't know Anima Anandkumar, she used to be at NVIDIA, and before that, I don't remember where she was before that, and I want to say she's at Caltech now, but she is, I would say, a giant in the field, very, very well-known, well-respected researcher, and I thought this was just like a nice biography of her and her work. Unfortunately, I think the thing that a lot of people know her for is that, so NeurIPS used to be called NIPS, and it was the source of a lot of stuff that made a lot of women uncomfortable, and given the existing gender disparities in the field, not ideal, and Anima was instrumental in getting the name changed to NeurIPS, which is the current name, and received a lot of harassment for it. So I think that also, unfortunately, is something that you may know her for, as being someone who was like basically harassed off Twitter, which is very, very unfortunate. But just a really cool, almost like a little mini biography, and I really liked her. There's like a nice little section here where it talks about, her some of her childhood foods, so jaggery and neem, and she was talking about like I want challenges, I want like the stuff that's difficult to work on, and then how that's applied to her work. So and I'll pop this in the chat if you want to read it, but she is like I said, really, really fabulous researcher, really cool person. Alexi said, I had the chance to go to Kenya, but decided to do otherwise, and it was a big mistake. Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah. All right, so that's all the practical stuff that I had. Sorry, no, that's all the research stuff that I had, and now we are on to practical things. Okay, good. Sorry, that pause was to see if my mic was picking up the yard work sounds from outside, but I don't think it is. So fabulous. So I there should be a, yeah, there we go. So this was a basically a think piece. So I think this is like a Substack for these two authors who have a book, and the book is AI Snake Oil. And this particular blog post is talking about why are deep learning technologists so overconfident, and I'll pop that in the chat. Hi again, Robbie. So I thought this was just particularly, relevant. It's actually something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, especially recently. God, it's so loud. I'm so glad the mic isn't picking it up. Oh, love to chainsaw things at 10:20 a.m. on a Thursday. It's not a bad time to chainsaw things, actually. Yeah, something that I've been thinking about a lot, and just sort of some ideas that they picked out that are leading to this like wild overconfidence, is one, this sort of idea that like all problems are the same. And this is something that I've run into a lot, particularly with, bless them, particularly with computer vision researchers who are coming into language, and they're like, oh, it's all tensors. I'm just going to shove it in there and it'll be fine. And then usually a couple months later, they come over and are like, hey, Rachel, so when you said that actually it wasn't fine, and then you gave me some concrete examples of things that were not going to work and then they didn't work. You want to talk more about that? Bless them. Anyway, not all problems are the same. And also, really good point about, so if you're not familiar with the history of AI as a field, there's this sort of general pattern where there'll be some breakthrough, everyone will get really excited about it, there'll be a bunch of hype pieces, there'll be a bunch of like op-eds and newspaper stuff, and then it'll turn out it doesn't actually do the thing that people promised that it would do, and then the funding all dries up. So you have this like AI summer, everyone's excited, lots of money, AI winter, people are less excited, not as much money. And that's a sort of general pattern of the field. And so people who've been in the field for a while have this sort of, I would say, kind of embittered doggedness to have stayed in a field that was undergoing those changes multiple times. So like Jeff Hinton, great example of somebody who's been through a lot of them personally. And so the sort of point that they're making here is that like, well, if that's your God, it's so loud. If that is your, not institutional, disciplinary heritage, then you're probably not going to listen to people, right? You're going to like be very set in your belief because eventually there'll be another summer, right? And then also this general neglect of domain expertise that like a machine learning person can teach themselves anything and do anything, right? Which I don't believe, and hopefully you also don't believe. But anyway, just an interesting discussion, and they bring up a lot of examples of sort of like, well, not a lot of examples. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot more examples in the book of times when things just like didn't work out and oops, it's racist, which tends to be kind of a theme in machine learning research, and the sort of like general issue of AGI hype, and how it is, I believe, genuinely misleading people. Yeah, so I think it was just an interesting piece. And then immediately after I saw this, I saw this tweet this morning, and was like, well, yep. So a shot and chaser. So it's this person who's baffled about the skepticism that AGI ever can or will exist given the strides in AI over the past few decades. Sure, maybe it's not happening in 6 months, but in 10 years, you really want to bet hard on no? Yes. Yes, I do. And the sort of like idea here is that like, oh, look, deep learning's already conquered things like chess, Go, Dota, and StarCraft. And oh, look, it's already hit the Turing test for casual chats and high school essay writing, which I think that this is being used as a proxy for language understanding that I think is unreasonable, and now it's like, and oh look, deep learning is going to solve creativity and we're going to be able to do creative art with AI, and yeah, again, very much the same sort of an example of this, right, where like all fields are the same, we're just gonna push through all problems in the same way. Anyway, AI snake oil. Yeah, so snake oil is, I'm assuming you're asking about the term. There was a time in the United States, and it might have been common globally, but I only really know about it in the context of the US, where it was legal to just sell medicine that you made up and you were like, it does this, and there was no way to test it and people could just do it. And so a common patent medicines is often what they were called, and a lot of times they were just like cocaine or just oil, and your belief that it was a medicine did the rest, right? And a lot of the one of the things that was very common to sell in this way is snake oil. And of course there were, huge claims that like, oh, it can cure paralysis, right? Or like this medicine can do everything. So snake oil is sort of drawing on that history of people lying about what their products do to steal your money. Is my dog chainsawing things? I wouldn't put it past him. I wouldn't put it past him. No, I think it's one of my neighbors. Yeah. All right. On a more, I guess, I don't know, concrete note, Sarah Hooker, who is the same person who was speaking at Deep Learning Indaba earlier, is hiring for her company, Cohere for AI, and specifically looking for postdocs. So if you have a doctorate, we're contributing to progress in machine learning through fundamental research. We see contributions to traditional conferences and publications and journals, an important part of our work, but also support efforts that go beyond the research paper and encourage scientific communication through different mediums. So if you're a postdoc and you're looking for a job, Cohere is hiring. They're hiring for a lot of different positions, actually. I think they've got quite a bit of funding at the moment. So, all right. So back to snake oil. Here is an example of something that don't work. So this company, Evolve Technology, claims that they can do weapon detection, right? So in the United States, most of you may know this, but just as some background, you have a constitutional right to bear arms, which people very broadly interpret, but usually not into specific places, right? So like you can't take a gun into a sports stadium, right? Or like other places where there might be mass shootings, another American specialty. And there's a system that this company is solving that claims that they can detect guns, and actually it does not actually do that. It's also notably already been deployed in schools, so children are being threatened to this. And there are some, pretty big issues with it. For example, Chromebooks, which are very popular as computers for students to have been setting off the detectors about 60 to 70% of the time. There are settings you can put it on to miss the Chromebooks, but you'll also miss some handguns. He specified you'll miss the subcompacts, which is a difficult give and take, which is wild. And people are paying for this commercial product, right? That will, and like, as as a machine learning practitioner, I get it. You're sort of like tuning your situational tolerance for type 1 and type 2 errors, but yikes, and children are already being subjected to this. Another thing about the US, if you didn't know this, is that oftentimes there will be police in schools, and oftentimes they'll just arrest children and take them to jail. And anyway, there are many things I love about my country, and there are many things that are problems, and that's one of them. Nick says, I wonder how they detect 3D printed ones. I mean, given that they won't detect all handguns consistently, I guess probably not very well. So, yep. And also on the sort of like general topic of snake oil, and things that don't work, but people will sure ask for your money for, there's this sort of idea that you can translate what pets are saying. And we've talked before about, the fact that animal communication very much is a thing. There are, specifically for cats, there are general classes of vocalization oh, what's her name? There's a animal communication specialist who I want to say is in Edinburgh, and my mind keeps giving me the name Robin McQueen. She's a linguist, but that's not her. I think I'm just thinking about her because she also does border collie trials. Anyway, so there are classes of vocalizations, but the idea that you can sort of do human text level translations of them is I would say not the consensus of the scientific community at this current time. Anyway, so this is the sort of general thing that people can do. And yes, I would caution, I would really caution you about using these things and make sure that they're using, methodology and also general classes that are actually applicable. And also for a lot of animals, an important part of the communication system is body language, and vocalization is like the tertiary thing that they use. So yeah, and it's also, misleading people and causing them distress, which I don't love. Yep. Nick says, I can't wait for cats telling us, hey slave, feed me now. Yep. I mean, yeah, like asking for food is definitely a thing that animals can do to humans, but also giving them a way to directly ask for food and only rewarding it some of the time is a great way to make sure that they only ever do that. It's as an aside, we've talked about those like buttons before and how it's, it's a clever Hans effect, and I don't think that the owners are trying to mislead us, but I don't think that they are doing what they think they're doing. But if you give a pet a button that like says food or like feed me, and you feed them sometimes when they do it, they are only ever going to use that button, and you will hate it. So don't do that. Anyway. Oh yeah, and Alexi's bringing up the buttons. Yes. If you enjoy it, and it causes you to spend more quality time with your pet, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I will say that any complex communication you get out of it is almost certainly random. I'll put it that way. Dana says, how do you validate a pet translation model when your pet can't validate it? That's goofy. Yep. Almost as if it's unprovably unprovable whether it's good or bad. Yeah. That would be crazy if Chewy made a pet translation model to sell more pet food. I mean, I hope that's the other thing, right? This is usually small companies, right? Big companies don't usually put out things that are, right? Because they've got more on the line. So they aren't usually as likely to just straight up lie to consumers. Not saying that they won't do it, they're just not as likely to do it. Yep. Anyway. And this one has a lot going on, and we may actually do a bigger deep dive on this, but this is the NLP Community Meta Survey results. I talked about the survey a while ago when they were still collecting data out of the University of Washington and New York University and Johns Hopkins. And, excuse me, I think it's really interesting and just sort of like a big discussion of different things, and actually the gender balance, I would say, is pretty good. I expected it to be worse. And then they're comparing it to the ACL memberships as of summer 2021. So yeah, really interesting, lots of information here. I'll pop the link to this in chat if you'd like to check it out. I'll just okay. Yeah. So interesting survey about, people who are in the field and what they believe, and sort of that general stuff. Yes, 100% this is coming. 100%. I would say in the next 3 years, but what do I know? Yeah, and just sort of a very interesting feeling on the field as a whole. So yes, maybe something that we will talk about a little bit more in the future. Also, on sort of, just generally data, this is something that I think is, I don't know, we've talked a lot before about sort of my feelings about social media, and that how the more specialized it is and the more closely moderated it is, the more valuable I think it tends to be. And I think this is a great example of very generalized social media with very lax moderation tends to lead to just garbage. So the most popular content on Facebook is just, you know, straight up jokes and spam, and not, you know, generally very great for society. So anyway, and this is from MIT Technology Review. And then back to something that is, I think, a little bit more relevant. So if you're familiar with Diversified Tech, they're a newsletter for folks who are underrepresented in tech generally, and they have their most recent newsletter is out as of yesterday. That was yesterday. And yeah, they've got jobs, events, speaking opportunities, career resources. So if you're in that group, this may be a useful thing to check out. Can I recommend any upcoming conferences, events, or workshops? I mean, it really depends on what you're interested and what you're looking for. But the Vicky Boykas's is it called Normcore Tech, which should be online soon. I think is going to have a lot of, you know, just super, super useful, interesting stuff. Let's see. I'm gonna try and get the conference. Here we go. So it's normconf.com, and I'll pop it in here. So this is probably, if I were just like picking a random thing to recommend, this is probably what I would recommend, and this is going to be in December, and I'll pop the link in the chat for you, Nick. Yeah, so like I said, Vicky is an extremely experienced technologist, very wise. I don't know, she's a great engineer. I would definitely, you know, trust the stuff that she says and the speakers that she and her organizing committee pick. It's going to be online, and yeah, that's the conference that I'm most excited for that's coming up soon. All right, and a final practical thing. So this is by Martin Zinkovich, who I'm not super familiar with, but I sort of like skimmed through, and a lot of, speaking of, you know, just wisdom and good advice, a lot of the discussion here is like spot on, exactly what I would say, which leads me to trust it. So it's a document about the best practices in machine learning engineering, and these first 3 rules I think are just really, really fabulous. Well, maybe not number 3. There was a lot of discussion about this on Twitter relatively recently. But rule 1 is don't be afraid to launch a product without machine learning. Please don't be afraid. And rule number 2, metrics design and implementation a priority. And then 3, sometimes I think it can make sense to use machine learning instead of a complex heuristic. Sometimes I think it doesn't. I think it's situational, but yeah, just solid advice, you know, especially like on the human analysis of a system. I think these points are all really good and helpful. And I would, yeah, I'd recommend giving this a look through if you are interested. All right, politics. And like I mentioned, we're gonna have like a surveillance focus today, and I didn't plan it, it just sort of happened that way. And a lot of court cases, All right, starting off with the one thing that's not a court case. And it's the definition of AI, which is increasingly important given the, you know, the coming legislation, right? Like, it's coming, there's nothing we can do about it. I think it's good that it's coming, but like the specific ways that things are written are going to have enormous impacts on our day-to-day lives as technologists, and then also on sort of the general state of the world and society as a whole. So I'm keeping a beady little eyes right on it. I don't think my eyes are especially bead-like, but so there are this is just sort of, I believe Daniel works in law, Emergent Tech at Access Now, ex-Mozilla fellow, creator at AI Miss, PhD in philosophy. So not a lawyer, but thinks a lot about defining things, I would say. So there's a lot of suggestions in the EU AI Act to use the OECD definition, but Daniel's pointing out that there are two. So the first one is an AI system is a machine-based system that is capable of influencing the environment by making recommendations, predictions, or decisions given a set of objectives. It does so by utilizing machine learning and or human-based inputs / data to 1, perceive real and or virtual environments, 2, abstract perceptions. I don't know what's behind that, how that S ends, into models manually or automatically, and 3, use model interpretations to formulate options and outcomes. And then the second one is even harder to read. Fabulous. System. An AI system is a machine-based system that can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or influencing real or virtual environments. AI systems are designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy. So I would say this, to me, these both sound a little bit more like a reinforcement learning approach than super good at covering NLP and related applications. But yeah, I guess there is perceiving. Robbie says, Emma, machine learning jobs seem more like DevOps. Yes, there's a lot that goes into the job. I would say that, for the average machine learning engineer, less than 10% of your time is actually spent doing, algorithmic work and deep learning. And the rest of it is like finding the data, going to meetings, figuring out what's important for the company, monitoring models, updating models, ML ops, right? Like putting things into production. Yeah. I think we talked, what was it, last week about the coding technologists time use survey, where they were like, less than 1 hour a day is actually spent coding, and that very much for machine learning as well, right? Like sitting down and like scrabbling away in a Python notebook is the minority of the job by a large chunk, and the more senior you are, the smaller that chunk is. So just the way of it. Nick says they're reducing AI to ML. Yeah, a little bit. And where these two documents are from, and then Daniel's opinion, the AI Act should use neither. Primarily because both of them are trying to define in a more scientific way what an AI system is. By contrast, the definition of AI system that the AI Act is defining in the AI Act is defining the scope of a legal instrument, and this must be the key consideration. I would agree. I think both those definitions are too narrow. When I say use neither, I mean word for word. The COM's original definition borrows heavily from them, but with some positive modifications, inclusion of generative AI. Yeah, that's important. That's a big one. It should be modified to drop the human-defined, though, and use machine-based system instead of software. So a thing to keep an eye on, especially if you are working in the EU, and I imagine it will be impossible not to. Scientists that develop algorithms are statisticians or mathematicians. So if you're interested in developing new algorithms, I would not look for a machine learning engineering job. I would look for a machine learning research job. And even then, a lot of it's going to be infrastructure. Yeah, no, I would agree. I think both of these are too narrow. And honestly, I think a lot of the reason that these are not super useful for what people are actually doing in the field is that they are trying to capture what people talk about when they talk about AGI, which is not useful or practical. All right, court cases. There are so many of them. So first off, Sephora, I guess the settlement is not a court case, but you know what I mean. Sephora had a $1.2 million settlement with California because they were using tracking pixels and cookies and were selling customers' personal information. You may remember from us talking about it before or just knowing about privacy law in the US, California has the strictest privacy legislation of anywhere in the US by a long shot. Although I think it's for facial recognition specifically, I think it's probably Arizona that does. I'm pretty sure it's Arizona where it's illegal to use facial recognition without a user's explicit consent. But besides that, California has the strictest privacy regulation in the United States. And they have, come down and said, hey, the California Attorney General was like, hey, you are violating the California Consumer Privacy Act, and you shouldn't be doing that, right? So specifically, California accused Sephora of making that customer data available to third parties, which it did by sharing that data with commonly used web analytics companies that run on its website and failing to disclose the sale of personal information or provide an opt-out link in some browsers. Under the CCPA, the sale is the exchange of personal information for anything of value, including third-party cookies and pixels, tech that companies can use to target and retarget ads to browsing customers. So be ye warned, it's coming, and I don't know, perhaps the days of the tracking pixel are numbered, which, can you imagine? I would love to see that. Oh, that would be great. And yeah, if you're doing it in California, be ye very, very warned. Nick says, we can just host servers elsewhere. Don't worry for you people. I love the way California is standing up for net neutrality in the US. Yeah, they really are. So here's to you, California state legislature. You can pass legislation in a way that, you know what? That's not fair. The Inflation Reduction Act did go through, and that was an enormous piece of legislation. So that's one thing. But I would love to see US privacy legislation. Speaking of relevant things, so this one is going to be specifically for folks in the US, and I'm going to pop this in the chat if you would like to give a comment. So this is a proposed rule on the use of commercial surveillance and data security, and I haven't gone through it in depth. It's on my to-do list. I'm very busy. Anyway, it's on my to-do list. Is publishing advance notice of proposed rulemaking to request public comment on the prevalence of commercial surveillance and data security practices that harm consumers. Specifically, the Commission invites comment on whether it should implement new trade regulation rules or other regulatory alternatives concerning the ways in which companies collect, aggregate, protect, use, analyze, and retain consumer data. So I think this would absolutely cover training things with consumer data, as well as the transfer, share, sell, or otherwise monetize that data in ways that are unfair or deceptive. So leave a comment if you're in the US. If you're not in the US, they're not going to care. But yes, could be very, very influential, and definitely something that I'm going to keep an eye on. Yeah, actually, I'm going to browse the posted comments. Never a great idea, but I am going to do it. Just going to pick this first person. What'd they say? An extra measure of protection privacy seems wonderful, needed. However, we have come so far with exposure of personal information, easy access to most any revealing fact we want. How then can this help us going forward? What can be reversed? Great question. I would say data deletion and the algorithmic death penalty. And yeah, anyway. And we talked about that last week, right? The existing ethical harms do not justify future ones. Nick says, finally an American GDPR. God, I wish. And I will say that this is specifically the trade regulation rules or other regulatory alternatives. So this would not be legislation. This would be regulation coming from a federal authority. I believe, I'm not a lawyer, but I did take civics in high school. Speaking of the FTC, they also sued, very American heavy one, but I think we have a lot of need for data privacy protection here in the US. The FTC sued data brokers for letting people track health clinic visitors. So this is really, really to my knowledge, this is the first time this has happened. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I just sort of keep an eye on this, where the FTC is like, absolutely not. So we've talked about data brokers a lot on this channel, and we're about to talk about them some more. And they are suing them for selling sensitive geolocation data, including details that could unmask people seeking or performing ovations. The lawsuit claims that they failed to add basic privacy protections to its location data, much of which is collected from phones without the owner's knowledge. The data can reveal people's visits to reproductive health clinics, places of worship, homeless and domestic violence shelters, and addiction recovery facilities. By selling data tracking people, Kochava has enabling others to identify individuals and exposing them to threats of stigma, stalking, discrimination, job loss, and even physical violence. So they can't sell it, and they're going to have to delete it, assuming the FTC wins, which I sure hope they do. So yeah, big case. I'm rooting for the FTC on this one. Also, I'm just going to move this slightly in order. Also very relevant for Fourth Amendment protection. So in the United States, again, sorry, very US-centric. That's just where all the important court cases were this week. I'm not ignoring everybody else. So in the United States, we have in the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment provides protection against unreasonable search and seizure. And this AP piece talks about fog reveal, which is a based in Virginia. That's where I'm from. Is why I'm not happy about that. Which is allowed police to search hundreds of billions of records from 250 million mobile devices and harness the data to create location analyses known among law enforcement as patterns of life. And they've been using it to prosecute people. So this is information collected without the user's consent or knowledge, presumably, and certainly not a warrant was involved. So a warrant is what allows the police to search things. And it's being sold for profit by this company, Fog Data Science LLC. Yep. It relies on advertising identification numbers. Advertising, the thing that Sephora was doing, and presumably the data brokers were using to collect data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the things that the FTC regulation is about. And yeah, which Fog officials said are called from popular cell phone apps such as Waze, Starbucks, and hundreds of others that target ads based on a person's movements and interest, according to police email. That information is then sold to companies like Fog. So information collected for selling ads, collected by data brokers, sold to the police, circumventing Fourth Amendment protections. Not great, and happening. So yes, I would love the GDPR. Alexi says, the USA is a weird country. It is. Nick says, everybody does image tracking on the web. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I would say I work in the field. I am probably more paranoid than most people. I go to, fairly great lengths to try to avoid that as much as possible, but it still happens to me. And it's, it's gotten to the point where if I want to use the tools that I need to use on the internet to do my job, which is this, I can't get around it, right? Like, I cannot exist in a digital economy without having ads targeted to me. I can't exist in a public-facing way in a digital economy without having ads targeted to me, which means that my data is being collected, which means it's being sold to data brokers, which means that people can just buy it, which opens, obviously everyone, but also me, up to specific harms, including stigma, stalking, discrimination, job loss, and even physical violence, right? Just like all comes together in this like crappy melange. Anyway, also some privacy papers from lawyers, I guess. So this first one is talking about, so again, very much focused on America and the US. Sorry, I shouldn't say America. We're not the only country on the continent. But yep. Yeah, I get that it's efficient to store people's information. And also I know that companies want to make money, right? And if there is a resource that you cannot that no one can stop you from just collecting and selling for your own gain. Why wouldn't you, right? I'm sure is their thought process. And, you know, harm to society be damned. People love to move fast and break things, even when those things are fundamental rights, because they assume it's not going to hurt them. Anyway, I don't know. I'm feeling a little bit saucy today. Just like all these things coming together was just like, we're not even into the ethics section. Anyway, so this is a discussion about, you know, how privacy and privacy protections are going to work within extended reality, which is the term that they're using to mean like the data ecosystem around individuals, I think. And the fact that privacy protection is just absolutely not up to it. So, yep. If you are interested, I'll pop the link to this in the thingadoo, the chat. There we go. And also, as always, if you want all the links collected and annotated, they're available to my coffee supporters. And I already uploaded them this morning. I was very efficient. And then another interesting paper where this one also talks about the EU, so not as US focused. And this one was particularly interesting because it talked about the sort of relationship between AI regulation and privacy regulation and how they're sort of like going to be built on each other, probably, which I thought was also pretty interesting. And this is forthcoming from the Boston University Law Review. So again, if you are a law paper reader, this may be relevant to you. So I'll pop that in the chat as well. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's useful for technologists to keep an eye on, you know, the regulation that's coming up, because, you know, I've sat through GDPR training. I'm sure you have as well. If you work in California, you've probably sat through the CCPA training, right? Like, this is going to affect us in our day-to-day life and what we can and cannot do legally within our profession. And also, you know, our rights and responsibilities to our users and society as a whole. So, I cannot imagine that at this time next year, there will not have been major changes in this space. So I'm just keeping my eyes on it. I'm watching. I'm really hoping that consumer regulation consumer protection gets the big end of the stick. All right, ethics. We're going to start off again talking about surveillance. No surprise, I don't think. So this first one is a piece by Khadija, who you may know. She's pretty active on Twitter, and I'll pop this in the chat as well. And it's about how predictive policing is becoming a part of child welfare agencies. And the sort of, I mean, it's a very personal story, but the basic idea is that, so child welfare agencies and child protection agencies that in the US will commonly remove children from their parents' care, particularly if those parents are poor, uses predictive policing and sort of like data-driven methods as part of what they use to decide to take away children and, you know, destroy families, which is, you know, not great, right? And doesn't give families, you know, the degree of autonomy and control over their own futures that I think they would like. Yeah. Also, if you're having a good day and you're like, I could stand to be upset, then reading about sort of the child welfare system in the United States and also the foster system will get you that upsetness. Yeah, Nick, Nick says Minority Report becoming true. Yeah. Yes, which is wild because in the United States, you are innocent until proven guilty, which means that you cannot predict crime because it hasn't happened yet, A, and because B, you're not proving guilt. It is wild to me. I mean, it's not, right? Like, I live in the US, I understand, you know, the policing culture here, but it's Anyway, and this is a more of an ethics discussion, but they're basically pointing out that, like, hey, we don't have federal protections. We are already caught in a surveillance net. I don't know. I'm showing my age a little bit here, but when Snowden was like, hey, the National Security Administration is tracking everything that you're doing on your phone, that was a big revelation for people, and they were really upset about it. But now corporations are tracking everything that you do on your phone and selling it to whoever wants to buy it. And that's not great. And this is specifically talking about governmental uses of it and how it can support authoritarianism, which is, I would say, a pretty big concern for those of us living in the country right now. Yep. Anyway, again, if you are looking to be upset, you can have ample opportunity to do so in today's thing. Nick says, we have here some shady laws, especially on terrorism, that punish the intent. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't actually know where you're from, Nick. I'm going to assume somewhere in the EU, perhaps, or maybe in the UK. Just sort of guessing on my very limited knowledge of world law. Yeah, it's interesting. The law in the US is based on English law, but there's some pretty significant differences. So, France. Okay. Okay. And this piece was really interesting, and I was interviewed for it. Just gonna say, it's useful but disturbing at the same time. Yeah. I mean, since we have pre-trial detention, yep, I think that de facto there's something sort of similar here in the US as well. Anyway, so this is an article on, the use of auto captions, which, like, obviously I use. I'm just going to be transparent about it. I would love to be able to provide hand-done captions on all my work. And I priced it out, and it would be about $500 a month. And I am not making that much. Let me put it that way. So it's sort of like on my to-do list. Like, once I have that much money, I will definitely be doing hand-done captions. But I'm still more or less working for free, which is fine. Part of building a channel and this sort of thing. And I expected it and have savings. But yes. So while I am aware that auto captions are not perfect, I do not have the means to do manual captions at the moment. Yeah. And in particular, I thought this anecdote was really telling about the difficulty of using YouTube's automatic captions. Or I guess on technical content, and the fact that things like sequel are misspelled. And this is work by, I'm pretty sure, Nicole. Sorry, I'm looking for the article authors. Is it just a byline? Anyway, so it's a discussion of errors in speech translation, in automatic captioning. And in particular, there were a lot of errors for non-native English speakers, which I think is not surprising, and was just an interesting read, and hopefully you'll like it. Alexi says, I'm from Russia. What's the law you're talking about? Oh, so Nick was talking about a anti-terrorism law in France that allows for the intent to commit acts to be prosecutable. Oh, unless you're saying, like, law, haha. And then there was this piece, which I thought was interesting, but I don't think I agree with, but I still think it's interesting, so I think it's important to think about things that you don't agree with. And it's just a sort of a think piece about, you may have heard the term attention economy, where everybody has a limited amount of focus in a day. Where do you spend that focus? A lot of sort of like especially recommendation algorithms, are trying to get you to spend your focus on their thing that they're recommending, or social media platforms are trying to get you to spend your time on their platform so they can serve you ads, so that they can pay the advertisers, so that they can track you, so they can sell your data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the sort of like the premise of this is that, like, hey, if you're in this, you know, constantly distracted state, it's harder to make ethical and moral judgments, which I don't agree with. I'm also, you know, personally, I find it pretty easy to limit my social media intake on a given day. I use like time blocking, but I know that not everyone finds that as easy as I do. So yeah, anyway, I think it's an interesting think piece. I don't think it's true. And also I think that, you know, people tend to have an easier time choosing to help people and choosing to relate to people that they have interacted with or that they've like seen in a variety of contexts. And I think that, you know, one benefit of social media is that you can interact with a lot of people who don't share your experiences, and it can help to really broaden your worldview and also, you know, expand your idea of who it is that, you know, who is out there and how you can relate to them and what form those relationships can take. So again, I don't agree, but I think it's an interesting piece. All right. And then also, speaking of interesting pieces I don't agree with, I would say that this is a very rosy, you know, piece on sort of like where voice recognition AI software is right now, and how helpful it actually is. I think it's, you know, could be helpful, but yeah, so the particular thing that they're talking about is that there's there's a pretty bad labor shortage in the United States right now of medical workers because obvious reasons, and as a result, there's just it's harder to get records. And a lot of the medical records in the United States are still transcribed by hand. So adding sort of an automated step can help with that. And I think it can definitely reduce people's workload. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be like the #1 thing that everyone's using forever. I think it can be a helpful tool, but I don't know. Whenever somebody says the future of X, my hackles immediately go up and I'm like, what do you mean by that? Here, show your work. So. One sec, sorry. Starting to lose my voice and we're only an hour in. That is not a great track record. Probably this coffee I don't like. Ugh, and then this, my God. Oh, I forgot to say my channel tagline at the beginning. My channel tagline is that my channel is for anyone who cares about language, technology, and other people. And this was upsetting to read. So 42% of UK data workers, based on a survey of 1,000 British employees by analytics automation company Alteryx, found that 42% did not believe data ethics is their concern. These findings go against the view held by experts that data ethics should be considered throughout the entire data lifecycle. Yes, yes, I would agree. And I think that that is pretty worrying. Alteryx's research shows a worrying trend, showing that training is only being offered to pre-existing experts such as data scientists and business analyzers. Instead, 29% of workers are opting for informal mentoring on data ethics, which, like, it's fine. There's just not a lot of if I search for, like, you know, facial recognition in 2 minutes on my phone tutorial, I'm going to get a lot of examples of that. If I search for data ethics in 2 minutes on my phone tutorial, I imagine I will find many fewer examples. It's, I don't know. So there's a pretty strong bias in internet content where, like, tutorials to do things in a fast and easy way tend to get a lot more interaction, and, like, misleading content that states things that are just not possible also tends to get a lot more interaction, and, you know, that's just the way it is. But yeah, Lexi says my friend works in the company which does it. Oh, nice. Oh, medical transcription. Yeah, If there are any errors in the medical transcription, it could lead to serious consequences. Yes, definitely. Like I said, I think it can be a labor-saving device. So one thing that I do when I do manual captions is I will do a first pass with an automatic recognizer, and then I'll correct them by hand. So I actually, if you look at my channel, my pre-recorded videos all have captions, and those I do by hand, but most of my content is live. The thought of trying to write down everything that I'm saying as I'm saying it makes me feel panicky. Ooh. Yes, don't like that. Anyway, yeah. Don't listen. You can believe that all you want, but when the legislation that is coming comes, it is going to be very much your problem, and the likelihood that businesses are going to try to push off the culpability onto individual employees, I would say, is high. I would be very, I just be careful in your work, right? Everybody wants to do a good job. Everyone wants to, wants their work to make the world better, I firmly believe. So yeah, don't not think about ethics. Because, best case scenario, it's fine and nothing ever happens. Worst case scenario, you individually are directly responsible for somebody's death, and like that is quite the dichotomy there. So, all right. Oh, here's the thing I mentioned earlier. So data centers really facing some issues. So I'm not. One sec. I want to look up something. Yes, okay, so I just wanted to double check that I had the date right. So California, a state in which there are a lot of data centers, has been in a drought since the year 2000. So more than 20 years this drought has been going on, and as a result, there is extreme water scarcity, right? So here, this lake is almost dry due to severe drought that's been fueled by climate change. And I mean, not to bum anybody out, but like particularly if there's major ocean current change, which my friends who work in oceanography are like pretty sure is going to happen pretty soon, this drought may or may not ever be resolved, right? Which is in contrast to where I live on the East Coast, which is where we are going to get a lot more storms and a lot more hurricanes and a lot more flooding. And even this year, there was really catastrophic flooding out in Western Virginia, up in the mountains. Like a whole town's just washed away. I mean, and obviously talking about flooding, Pakistan has had unimaginable devastation this week. And also in the US, Jackson, Mississippi, which is the capital of the state of Mississippi, currently has no water, and the city itself has run out of bottled water to give to residents. So water is an issue. Water is a scarce resource, and we are using it on data centers. And yep, and this sort of thing really popped out at me. The US public is beginning to take notice of the water many facilities require to keep from overheating. Like cooling systems in large office buildings, water is often evaporated in data center cooling towers, leaving behind salty wastewater known as blowdown that has to be treated by local utilities. The reliance on water poses a growing risk to data centers as computing needs skyrocketed at the same time that climate change exacerbates drought. Around 20% of data centers in the US already rely on watersheds that are under moderate to high stress from drought and other factors, according to a paper co-authored last year by Arman Shahabi, a research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, right? So very much an issue. Compute is not free. It uses limited resources. We should be certain when we are training something that it is worth it, right? Nick says business leaders would take it more seriously if there were data policies and data police to enforce it with surprise controlling power. No, I absolutely agree. I think the only way that we're going to get, consumer protection is legislation. Companies are not going to do it on their own. And the majority of companies that are talking publicly about data ethics and issues in this area are all talking about, oh, you know, we need to make sure that AGI is aligned, a thing which we have no strong evidence it's even possible, right? So we're thinking about possible harms of something that we don't have strong evidence is possible, instead of the immediate harms that are genuinely harming civil society and individuals. Smoke and mirrors, smoke and mirrors. I got zero patience for it. Moving on. So Stable Diffusion's out there. And it is also using, just like Bloom, open Rails, so the responsible AI license. And I have a video on my channel with, let me double check. It was from a while ago. Yassine, whose last name is Jarnett, from OpenAI, Hugging Face, about this license and sort of the thought behind releasing Bloom. And also Stable Diffusion has been released under the same license, which part of the license says you can't use it for various bad things. Big question is, A, how do you know if people are doing it? And B, what are you gonna do about it as the license holder, right? So, yep, TBD. And also, it's in here somewhere as a sort of reaction to, was it here? Yes, as a sort of reaction to the Stable Diffusion thing, you know, Sonagar is a research scientist at Google, who it was also just like, surprise that Stable Diffusion is out there for public use and it's considered okay, right? And, you know, I think that really ties into this idea that a lot of people are like, well, data ethics is not my problem, right? If people use the tools I build to do something bad, that's on them, not on me for enabling that harm. So, yep. And a nice sort of point down here where there's, you know, a pretty strong assumption that open source, focus on me, please. There we go. That open source is an inherent good in and of itself, which I think can be the case in some situations, but not when the thing that you are open sourcing has tremendous potential to do harm without mitigating measures for it. So anyway, and then this piece from the MIT Technology Review, I think, is very interesting, very well written, and it's by Melissa Akikila. That looks like Finnish, so I've almost certainly said that wrong. And her question was like, okay, so large language models trained on the internet, basically. What does it know about me as an individual? So if you watch the you know, adversarial uses of our language models video that I put out a while ago, you will know that you know, language models leak PII. There doesn't seem to be a way to prevent it. And you know, it has all of our PII, right? Because it was scraped from the internet at large without our consent. Yeah. And says, GPT 4chan was shut down. Will this be shut down? I mean, yeah, sure, it was shut down, but it had already been forked and copied, and, you know, very intentionally by people who wanted to use it for malicious uses. So I don't know what's currently happening with that model, but probably nothing good. And yep, a great example of how open source is not a clear good. And like, I think the same thing with Stable Diffusion. I don't, like, you can't put it back in the bottle, right? People who are going to use it for malicious uses, like, already have their copy, you know? That sort of thing. And even if the model itself isn't made available, you know, you can reconstruct a model from queries, right? It's another thing I talked about in the adversarial attacks on language models thing, is that it's possible to get a copy of the model even if the model isn't provided and just an API is provided. So yeah, I don't know how tractable that is with image-based models, but it's definitely tractable with text-based models. Anyway, big question. And you can find out, you know, this person was like, yep, it definitely has information on this particular individual and is correctly producing text. Is this text grounded? No. Is this, you know, this is based on the information that's available. This is based on text that has been placed on the internet, is not based on like knowledge lookup or anything like that. But yes, there are pretty, the fact that any of the generated text does leak individual identifying information is bad, right? Like the fact that this happens at all is bad, even if it doesn't happen reliably, if that makes sense. So very interesting paper. And I think particularly for people who are not in the field, I think this is going to be very illuminating for them about sort of the dangers of having these models available. Alexia says, rip GPT 4chan. I mean, I hope it rests in peace. That'd be nice. And again, limited resources, and this is what you chose to use them for. It's not good. Anyway, so some wisdom from Abeba Barhain, who we love on this channel. Really fabulous researcher, does really fantastic work. Something that she said, which I think is a great point, is that most of the AI for social good is white saviorism with AI. Don't at me. So if you're not familiar, part of the idea that made, you know, colonizing and subjugating and abusing large swaths of the world population palatable for European intellectuals was this idea that, like, oh, you know, white people have to do this. It's for their own good that we're taking all their money and, you know, subjugating them to some of the worst stuff that's ever been done to other human beings by human beings. So, and sort of reflects of this in sort of current thought, which I think in most cases is not intentional, but it's definitely a thing, is that, like, oh, well, you know, white people can go in and save these poor people that are struggling, right? So a good example of this is sort of mission trips. This may be more of a US thing. I don't know how common it is cross-culturally, but basically a church will, like, pull together some money and they'll send their kids to, like, a Haitian orphanage, and they'll paint the orphanage and they'll feel great about themselves. And, you know, not usually do very much good for the place that they are going to, but it's like a vacation for them. And there's this sort of, like, idea of, like, oh, you know, you're coming in and you're solving problems for these people. And it's very paternalistic, and often it creates more problems than it actually helps solve. And Abeba's saying that a lot of the AI for social good projects are a continuation of this, right? Like, we're going to solve X for Y community without Y community's input, or figuring out if X is even the most important problem for them, right? So I think a great thing to think about, and also, you know, important historical context for this work. Nick says, white chivalry isn't limited to white people, I guess. No, no, but specifically in this context, right? So a great example of here is, like, Facebook doing, like, oh, we're gonna do, you know, NLP for Africa, and we'll bring in a bunch of, like, people from the US to do that, when there are very capable NLP researchers in Africa who could actually use the resources and know what is the most pressing problem for their language communities, right? Anyway, this is a really interesting piece about sort of AI ethics and algorithmic choices. And I think the thing that really stuck out to me was this sort of general thing. I'm trying to make, trying to find the specific section of the paragraph that really popped out to me. this a little bit. So organ donation is, I'm going to assume most of you would know what organ donation is, but just in case, particularly when somebody dies, if their organs are still functioning and they can be put into another human and, save or prolong their life, we do that, assuming that the person who died gave consent to it before their death. So like it's usually on your driver's license in the US. I'm an organ donor. I mean, not yet. I'm still using them. But the thing is, like, there are more people who need organs than there are organs. So how do you decide who gets the organs? And in the United States, there's, actually we talked about how there is one of the companies that does the distribution network stuff is based here in Richmond, in Virginia, where I am. But this is a section that really stuck out with me, talking about like who makes this decision, who gets the kidney. Such choices can be pushed down the line until a data scientist or other expert is left with no alternative but to make what is an inescapably moral decision, often on the basis of some technical and neutral seeming detail, right? And this is what the almost half of UK data scientists who say that data ethics is not their problem are going to be faced with, right? It's going to happen to all of us at some point. In the world of organ transplants, surgeons and data scientists have an unusual habit of being brutally honest about the human lives behind their work, of inviting others into the impossible choices their field confronts. For better or worse, the organ transplant system is itself a real-life laboratory of more inclusive, accountable techniques for building and using AI. Approaches that are now being proposed in the US and EU legislation that could cover courts, courtrooms, hiring, housing, and other sensitive data. The data scientists at UNOS were in essence raising their hands to say that a seemingly technical decision was actually a moral one and that they were not the people to resolve it. And I think that this is such a good model of ethical decision making, right? Like being like, hey, I don't know enough to do this. I shouldn't be the one to do this. I understand that this will have an impact on someone out in the world. That is a moral and ethical decision that someone else with more context should be making. Yeah, I think it was just very high stakes, obviously, right? Like I mentioned, the worst case scenario, someone dies, and in this case, someone is going to die, and this algorithm is being used to pick who, basically. Obviously that is a choice that doctors often need to make, and there is a moral framework for that in medicine that we don't have in data science and should not develop, right? It is discipline specific. So yeah, just a really, really interesting piece. I thought it was super interesting and a great case study for what data science moral judgments can be. Yep. Nick says charity businesses. Yup, absolutely. Alexi says when they no longer use them. Yes. You can. So generally, if someone is still living and they do organ donation, it will be to usually a close relative or someone else who is a match for them. So like bone marrow donation is usually done by that, and you can donate your genetic data to a bone marrow donation bank to try and find potential matches if that's something you're interested in doing. It's usually something like kidneys or, usually kidneys are generally to like close relatives who have a compatible genetic profile. Yeah, and so this is the last thing, like, again from Abeba Berhain, and it's in response to this this message on a data set. The blank data set may contain some inappropriate data, and any problems resulting from such data are the full responsibility of the user who used it. Not the responsibility of you for failing to remove that inappropriate data and still make it accessible and available. And Beba's point is people mass scrape toxic stuff from the web and call it a data set with minimum effort to make it safe and equitable, and then dump responsibility on the user. There has to be a mechanism for accountability. Yeah, and I think that's a great this is not this, right? Me saying I don't want to think about it, so it's all the user's fault if anything bad happens, is not the same as me being like, hey, this is a moral quandary that I don't have the skills and expertise to resolve. I'm going to need, you know, additional input. And yeah, that's not this. These are inequivalent, but people do it. Anyway. Yeah. Let's end on a little bit more of a fun note. Some miscellaneous stuff. So first off, I don't know if any of y'all already saw this, but so if you're not familiar, Walmart is starting to do that same thing that Amazon does, where they sell items from third parties, right? So it's like a Amazon marketplace or a Walmart marketplace, right? You're not buying it directly from Walmart. And one of these items was a fraud. So it was a 30 terabyte hard drive that was actually not that. It was 2 SD cards in a plastic casing, and they had been like it gave the appearance of having 30 terabytes, but it did not, in fact. Anyway, so just a funny thing, and I guess be skeptical because Walmart took it down, but just don't believe anything that is too good to be true when people are trying to sell you products online, whether or not they're machine learning. Also, so this is from Virginia. The DMV's Department of Motor Vehicles, they decide, so I think it's pretty common around the world that you can have vanity license plates, which is basically you can decide what's on the license plate. But at least in Virginia, they have to go through, you know, individual approval. And somebody did a Freedom of Information Act request to look at all of the license plates that were denied, which I think is pretty funny. So just some examples. This one is Yeehaw MF, MF being a shortening of something explicit. Pretty AF, fart car, drug references. So you can't have cocaine as a license plate in Virginia. I think Damn Girl is a great license plate, and I'm very sad that they didn't let people do it. Yeah. Anyway, just sort of general things that weren't allowed. Also, you know, derogatory discussion about current events and politicians. Yeah. Anyway, so the usual things that are banned are profane, obscene, or vulgar in nature, sexually explicit or graphic, excretory related, that's a broad one, used to describe intimate body parts or genitals, used to condone or encourage violence, or used to describe illegal activities or other illegal substances. Yes, so I thought that it was pretty funny. Also, just as a note, BLM is a license plate, and it has been on a vehicle since 2017, so you can't have it, it's somebody else's. In the state of Virginia. Yeah, just kind of funny. Lexi says, sometimes it's creepy how similar our Twitter bubbles are. Social network effect. Nick says, same problem as the fake 1 terabyte cards from AliExpress. Tweaked firmware. Nick has a license plate that would be rejected in a video game. What would be my vanity plate? I don't know. I've actually never gotten one. No idea. No idea. It's not something I've ever really thought about. Maybe I guess fat ML. I don't know, that would be accepted though, so fairness, accountability, and transparency in machine learning. All right, and then, so this has been deleted, but Duolingo made an oopsie, and I'm including it here not to dump on Duolingo, but just as like a general FYI. They changed something about their Zulu language lessons, and they had Duo, the little owl waving a flag, but it was this flag. So in the military type of international phonetic alphabet, that's like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie for spelling things out, Z is Zulu. So the flag means Z, but in the international phonetic alphabet, it means Zulu. So somebody searched Zulu flag and picked the first one. I believe the flag they use in the app is actually the flag of South Africa. And yeah, that was wrong. And the public service announcement here is just that languages are not flags. Flags do not represent languages. Flags represent countries, and the relationship between countries and languages is not one-to-one. So I would just not use a flag to represent a language in general. And, you know, if I were designing this graphic, I would probably have, you know, I'd probably have Duo maybe wearing a culturally relevant piece of clothing to Zulu speakers, or, you know, playing a culturally relevant musical instrument or something. Yeah, I'm not gonna get a vanity license plate, but I think that would be a good one. Oh yeah, the NATO alphabet. Yep. Hey, old player. All right, and then this one is actually, I found out about this because someone messaged me. It's based on a data set that I uploaded to Kaggle so long ago, many years ago. But basically it's looking at the popularity of different English monarchs in the names of pubs. So these are the the monarchs of England in order, starting with Alfred the Great. There's only one Canute pub, which I find sort of interesting. And then, as you can see, there's sort of a recency bias. So starting with the Georges, there's a lot more. Victoria is far and away the most common. And then it goes down, which is interesting. Not as many Elizabeths as I would have guessed. So I live in the state Virginia. There's only 7. So I live in the state Virginia, which is named for Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, Virginia. I don't know. I'm also, I would say, not a fan of monarchies as an idea, but I thought it was a cool visualization and sort of interesting how there is a little bit of a recency bias, but like, after Victoria, looks like there's been a little bit of a drought. No one's named any pubs after the current reigning queen. So, ooh, and there's my name misspelled. It doesn't bother me. I do not care if people misspell my name. So. But that is all that I have for today. So lots of court cases, lots of discussion about surveillance. If you are a coffee supporter, I have already sent out the links for today. But I do want to see a little plug. I wrote a book. If you haven't read my book, you should read my book. And thank you very much to everybody who's bought a copy. I really appreciate it. Yes. Oh, also, so it includes as well a little checklist / poster that you can print out and put on your wall and make marks on. And I also added the slides from my stream yesterday, and I tidied them up a little bit. So those are also on there, and you'll get them all when you buy the book. So if it is something you're interested in, if you work on language technology, if you're looking for a gift for a friend who works on language technology, maybe send them a copy of the book. So. And before we wrap up, I want to say thank you very much to all of my monthly supporters. I really appreciate you. It's helping make this possible, and hopefully will continue to be possible into the future. So thank you so much for supporting me. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great weekend and stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you on Tuesday for something. I don't know, we'll do something fun. All right, I'll talk to you then. Bye.